Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi is in Canada for a 3-day visit, the first by a Chinese foreign minister in nearly a decade. He's expected to meet with Foreign Minister Anita Anand and Prime Minister Carney. The visit comes as Ottawa recalibrates its foreign policy in a rapidly shifting global landscape, with the Carney government working to define a more pragmatic relationship with Beijing, amid, of course, growing geopolitical uncertainty. So for more on what to expect from Wang's visit, I'm joined by Vina Nadjibulla, Vice President of Research and Strategy at the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada. Vina, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Marc-André.
So I was mentioning the first visit by a Chinese foreign minister to Canada in nearly a decade. It comes after, of course, Marc Carney went to Beijing earlier this year in January. Talk to us about the significance of this visit, because obviously there's been a deliberate effort to thaw that relationship. So talk to me about how important it is to see the Chinese foreign minister coming to Canada now.
Absolutely. It is an important visit, and it very much builds on Prime Minister Carney's trip to Beijing, which was a turning point. It opened the door in some ways for Canada and China to do more. And I think Wang Yi's visit is really about implementation, about really getting down to business and figuring out what specifically Canada and China can do together, right? What are the sectors in which we will be doing more together? And what are those guardrails that we often hear about from Prime Minister Carney and others about being clear-eyed, having guardrails? So a little bit more discussion on all of that is going to be part of that. So there are important things on the agenda bilaterally around trade, around investment, around difficult issues on foreign interference and so forth. But also there is a kind of a trilateral element to this, because he's coming to Canada, but the messaging is very much also to Washington as well. Mm-hmm. And I think it's interesting that our Prime Minister is currently in the US, and he's being asked questions about China and about the new strategic partnership that we launched with China in January. And then we have Chinese foreign minister visiting and meeting with him the very next day. So there's also that trilateral element that we have to watch.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk leading up to this visit about how they both sides, China and Canada, hope to stabilize, normalize relationships to kind of reopen those channels of communication. So what do you think are the objectives for this specific visit in terms of concrete, tangible outcomes that both Beijing and Ottawa are looking to move forward?
So we're unlikely to see too many new announcements, in part because January was only a few months ago and there's a lot of work happening behind the scenes. But of course, China would like to see some movement on EVs. But that's a difficult issue for Canada because, again, we have to triangulate that with the US, given the integrated nature of the auto sectors, right? So we have a deal. That provisional deal is valid for 1 year when it comes to relief for our agricultural products. At some point, that would have to be extended. So there will be discussions during this visit, but unlikely any announcements. Mm-hmm. I think there's also interest to see which sectors China will be investing in, especially in the lead up to the big summit that Prime Minister Carney will be holding in September in Toronto. So obviously China would be invited. China wants to be investing in our major projects, but there's still question marks about which sectors would be allowed and which will not be. And then, of course, for me, Marc-André, what's interesting is to figure out how will the difficult issues in the relationship be dealt with. Mm-hmm. I mean, Prime Minister has said that we will be doing so quietly, that would be done behind the scenes, but just because we're trying to improve economic relations, and that's important, we should, doesn't mean that foreign interference, transnational repression, cyber espionage, even China's enablement of Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine, those haven't gone away. Mm-hmm. So yes, discuss them in private, but in a democracy like ours, there is also responsibility on the part of our elected officials to build public trust by having public clarity and transparency. So I'll be watching closely to see what Minister Anand and others are able to say publicly about how some of those difficult issues are being dealt with. And the issues are a whole variety of them, right? So it's not just the economic and trade and investment relations that will matter.
Yeah, and I'll get to some of those thorny issues, including foreign interference and obviously Canada's position on Taiwan in just a second. But in terms of what China is seeking from Canada right now, tell us about how China sees Canada strategically, especially in the context of its rise vis-a-vis the United States.
Yes, absolutely. So as I mentioned, this is a visit to Canada, but the messaging is very much to the US. For China, this is a big diplomatic and in some ways propaganda win for the CCP to be able to say that China is deepening relations, building a strategic partnership, deepening political trust, seeking strategic alignment with Washington's closest ally until recently, and of course at a time when our relations with the US are under significant strain. So there is very much a PR, public messaging element, if you will. And besides that, of course, China is interested in deepening certain economic relations. So I think there's genuinely interest in pursuing more energy resources, for instance. So China already is buying quite a bit from us from TMX pipeline expansion and the opportunity that now we have to sell more of our energy to Asia. A lot of that is going to China. So there are real issues when it comes to economic and trade relations, but I think what matters to Beijing, from my perspective at least, what matters to CCP is actually the political messaging around this opportunity to create more daylight, to create more division between Washington and Ottawa at this time.
Yeah, because Canada is having to navigate this new reality with, I think we can call it American withdrawal on certain fronts, and also, as I mentioned, China's rise. So Mr. Carney seems to be pursuing this deeper engagement with China while also managing what is an increasingly complicated relationship with Washington. How difficult do you think is that balancing act for Canada, and to what extent can Canada really meaningfully expand or deepen its collaboration with China without angering Washington, to an extent where it just makes things even worse?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And it is a balancing act. It is a triangulation. It's something that would have to be managed over time as we see where things end up in our discussions with the U.S. over CUSMA. Prime Minister Carney just today in New York said that we want to build a new partnership with the U.S., a partnership that in some sectors would involve deeper integration, this Fortress North America, certainly when it comes to steel or aluminum, and he even mentioned autos in that. So which means that puts certain limits to how much we can do on EVs with China unless US also moves in that direction. And now some people thought that maybe during the Xi-Trump summit that just took place that there would be some announcements on EVs. There weren't. And in fact, what we saw was a bipartisan push to say, no, this needs to still remain close to China, right? So I think it will be a very difficult balance, but I think what we have to be focused on is Canada's interests, right? Laser focus on what's good for Canada in terms of not just short-term exports of our agricultural or energy products, but long-term industrial policy for Canada, right? What kind of manufacturing sector we want to have, what kind of economy do we want to have? Because the issues that we have with China are not just US related. In other words, it's not just US that basically says we shouldn't have the EVs. There are actual structural issues around overcapacity, around subsidies, around China's industrial policy that makes it really difficult for others, Canada included, to have a robust manufacturing industry, right? We're seeing this in Europe, we're seeing this in Southeast Asia, we're seeing this in Japan. So Canada will have to do multiple things at once. We have to reduce our reliance on the US while maintaining market access to the US. We have to deepen economic engagement with China while making sure that we don't become strategically dependent or increase our risks. And we have to develop an independent foreign policy at the same time as being realistic about our geography and our deep integration with the US for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly seems like quite the tightrope act. And Mr. Carney has framed his approach to China as being pragmatic, right, interest-based. The idea is to engage with China where it serves Canada, as you say, being laser focused on Canada's interests, but also, being clear-eyed about the areas where there is disagreement, in some cases significant disagreement. How workable do you think that is with China? Where do you think tensions are more likely to arise?
I think that is certainly the objective, but it's easier said than done. Selective engagement, sort of this pragmatic foreign policy with China is going to be tough because it requires China to agree to it as well, right? And again, the issues that I mentioned on transnational repression, on foreign interference, on cyber, on what's happening in Taiwan, South China Sea, Ukraine, none of those have gone away. China would like all of that to be discussed behind closed doors, but that puts pressure on democracies and on officials in a country like Canada, because we have to be able to, as citizens, know that our government is not trading silence on these issues for commercial gains, right? So the challenge really for our leaders is to reassure Canadians that these issues are being dealt with, while obviously at the same time maintaining that pragmatism. So I think one announcement that might be coming out, Marc-André, from this visit is setup of mechanisms like the national security and rule of law mechanism that used to exist between Canada and China, but then became dormant during the crisis of 2018-2021. And if they set up that mechanism, the idea is that some of these difficult issues will be discussed there.
Well, and just on that, just yesterday the Montreal Institute for Global Security released a report calling for more coordinated response from G7 countries on what it calls systemic foreign interference by China, and it identifies Canada as a, quote, significant target. In your view, how serious is that concern today? And how, again, I mean, I think you've spoken to how it complicates the efforts to normalize relationships with Beijing, but how serious is that threat today? What do Canadians need to know about it?
It is a serious threat, and actually we don't even have to look at non-governmental reports. Our own CSIS, our own intelligence agencies are saying that as recently as 2 weeks ago, right? They identified that China, India, Russia, and Iran, but China is the most active actor in foreign interference here in Canada. So that is an issue. I think the challenge for us is that this issue seemed to have been a big priority 2-3 years ago, but now given everything else that's going on, it's easy to put it on the back burner. And I think that would be a mistake because it's influencing the lives of Canadians here on Canadian soil. It's something that gets to the core of our democracy, to the core of our way of life. And we have to be able to remain vigilant, to protect ourselves, and to do that with other allies, right? And I think this is where Prime Minister Carney's middle power diplomacy becomes important, because we can't do this alone. We need Europe, we need Taiwan, Philippines, Japan, Korea, Australia, other democracies to work together in preserving those freedoms that are important to us while also ensuring our economic resilience.
So obviously a complex relationship to navigate in what seems to be an ever more complicated world. Vina Nadjibulla, Vice President of Research and Strategy at the Asia Pacific Foundation. Thanks again for your time today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.